next speaker to share about 3 questions of adolescence journey to adulthood.
Right, and that's our expert coming from San Francisco who's been waiting online. Jeffrey, it's so nice to have Mr. Jeffrey Leiken. He is all about empowering adolescents. You know, I'm going to hand over to you so you could talk about yourself more and your presentation that you're going to share with us today. And thank you so much for being patient. I know it's getting a little bit later in the night, and today is actually your wedding anniversary. And I know you cut short a bit of the celebrations and you have your wife's permission to do this with us. So we're very grateful, Jeffrey. Thank you and happy wedding anniversary.
Thank you. It will be my wedding anniversary by the time we're done. So
yay!
soon enough here. So.
Yeah, great way to celebrate. And thank you. Send our thanks to your wife as well for being so kind and to let you have time with us.
Anyway, I appreciate the invitation to join in the dialogue because I recognize that's what this is. If there was, an easy answer that we all had the one simple solution to, but obviously all of our lives are a journey, and the journey of growing up is complex. And so what I first want to do, I thought just sort of frame for you so you understand who I am and what it is that I do. I do live in California. I live just north of San Francisco, born and raised here in the United States, have lived out in this part of the country for about 30 years, but I've actually traveled all over the world working with organizations who work with youth, and also in a private practice where I do mentoring and coaching with adolescents. And the way that I think about this is that, sorry, I got to get this to change. There we go. Are you seeing a screen now that says first voice, second voice? Is that?
Yes, it's all good.
Okay. Just had to make sure. I don't usually use PowerPoint. I usually use the Apple software, but I'm using PowerPoint because I wanted the one that had the Chinese translation in it. So,
thank you.
So the way that I think about this is that when our children are born and when they're young, the first voice that they hear in their life is a very unified single voice in terms of the messages that it receives. So right and wrong, good and bad, how to behave. These are all really very straightforward messages because it's parents, it's grandparents, it's a very select group of people who are giving messages, and children have no reference other than what it is that they're taught. So this first voice is teaching them that there's a certain right way to live life, a correct way to behave in the world. As they start to get older and they begin to engage in the social world, so that would be around the ages of 3 or 4 or 5 years old, and they begin to go into preschool or early childhood. In the United States, the education model is kindergarten and then first grade. By this age, all of a sudden, they begin getting a lot of exposure to other children who have been raised in different homes, have received different messages, or in many cases have been exposed to lots of other messages from the media or something, and they begin to get what I refer to as this second voice in their life. And by the time that they're teenagers, it's not just other children from other families who are being told something, it's also the abundant exposure that they have to the media, to the messages in the music, to the popular culture, to television shows, to things that they read online. And there's just this screaming, loud cacophony of noise that comes at them, what I refer to as the second voice. And very often in all of our journeys growing up, that message we're given in the first voice from our parents and our schooling starts to become in conflict with these messages that we're getting from outside of ourselves. So it's everything about what you should be doing, what is good, what is bad behavior, when you should be doing things. When your peer culture is saying it's okay and your parents are saying it's not, there's a conflict that comes into play. And it's a conflict that all of us have to work our way through in our lives. So in the work that I do professionally, the way that I think of the role that I play is I play the role of a third voice. So my background, when I say about a third voice to this, is I'm neither their parent, nor am I their peer or their friend or the pop culture. A voice that stands on the outside has a perspective of really having a deep, intricate understanding of the stage of life that they're in and helping them to learn a lot of the intricate things that need to go on and they need to understand so that they can have very happy, successful, thriving lives. My experience was in the United States growing up here was that I got a chance to go to a summer camp as a boy. And I started around 9 years old. And by the time I was about 12 or 13 years old, there were a couple of the adults who worked, and I say adults, but they were really just university students, people in their early 20s who were the staff members, who I really looked up to, just guys who I thought were like really cool guys. And they could say things to me. They could give me criticism. They could give me encouragement. And it's like, if it came from anybody else, I probably would not have taken it seriously, but because it came from them, I took it in and it meant something to me. If they gave me, if my parents gave me encouragement, I thought, well, it's my parents. They love me. They're supposed to. But oh my gosh, when this counselor who I looked up to so much at camp would say it, boy, it would mean the world to me. And oftentimes, quite literally, these people would be saying the exact same words, but it would have a very different impact. And it was one of the earliest realizations that I had in working with children and with youth, is that two people can say the exact same words to a child and get totally different results. So who we are and what the essence of the relationships is that we form with the child is more important oftentimes than the actual words that we say. And I was thinking about this as I was listening to the group panel discussion earlier about how some of these issues that some of the people are having could be resolved if the right person was in their life saying the message in the right way. And so that's what I've dedicated my life to doing, is being that third voice in their life, who is somebody that they can turn to, somebody they can call. So I work at this point primarily with adolescents who are the youngest around 13 years old. The oldest are people who are in their mid to late 20s. And I sort of define it as this: you're no longer a child, but you're not yet fully standing on your own 2 feet, feeling confident, secure as an adult. So somewhere in that range. And just in my day today, I started off this morning talking to a 20-year-old university student, then a 13-year-old who's an 8th grader, middle school student here in the United States, and then meeting with an 18-year-old girl who is making decisions about boyfriends and about going off to university and grappling with other kinds of relationships in her life. And that was just all before noon today in my world. So what I'm going to be speaking about is, after over 34 years or so at this point of working with this demographic, of working with this age group, these things that began to become very, very, very clear to me about distinct stages that children go through on that journey from they first step into adolescence and to the point when they have resolved it and have become an adult. And while there have been many models, psychological theory and developmental models laid out there over the years, none of which I'm going to say is wrong, I like to think of this that oftentimes we have a tendency to oversimplify things that are actually really complex. And if anything, that's extraordinarily appealing in today's world. But we also sometimes have a tendency to overcomplicate things that are actually kind of simple. Okay.
We need to unmute Jeff.
Okay, I got it. Okay. So I'm going to try to walk that middle line of not being too simple, but also not making it more complex. So here's the first stage that happens. In fact, this is perfect because the 13-year-old boy who I spoke to today, the first stage that happens is not only do their bodies begin to go through puberty, but their social world also begins to go through puberty. And anybody out there who's a parent who has a child that's somewhere around 12 to about 14 or 15 years old, you know what I'm talking about, where all of a sudden they begin to become more curious, more interested, and oftentimes obsessed with the world of their peers and where they fit in the world of their peers than they do with anything else. And oftentimes it can be even just a few months earlier, they just wanted to be home and, playing with the dog or being with the family or watching TV. And now all of a sudden, all they think about is who's on the phone, what's the messages, what's going on in the social world. And it's because their social world goes through a puberty of its own. And what I mean by that is that they go from just where your friends are friends of convenience or proximity. So it'll be friends, you play on the same sports team with, or your next door neighbor, for example, could be somebody who is your best friend growing up. What'll happen is As they get to this stage of life, all of a sudden there starts being, instead of just groups of people based on simple things, it starts being on things based on like social politics, what you can wear, what you can't wear, what music you can listen to, what music you shouldn't be listening to, what's the right language to be using, what's the, wrong things to be saying. And they start having not just different groups, but cliques and then hierarchies. So you'll have popularity, who's low on the popularity, who's high on the popularity scale. And children at this age, because their brains are now developing into this stage of life, begin to have this realization that they're going to have to learn how to live in the world of their peers. They can't just rely on mom and dad and being home. They have to really learn how to function out there in the larger world. So the question that goes on for them is, where do I fit in this world of my peers? And will I fit in this world of my peers? And it takes the form of questions. And so the questions start to look something like this. Am I desirable enough? Am I attractive enough? Am I appealing enough? The one that I frequently use, and this, if you speak English as a first language and you're in the Western world, this translates very clearly. It's like, am I cool enough? That thing that you want to have where you walk in a room and people are like, oh yeah, look at him, look at her. Yeah, they're cool. Like they got their thing together. And that's the underlying question that's going on in most children at this age. They're trying to resolve that question for themselves. So here comes, well-intended, well-meaning parents who comes along and says, who cares what anyone thinks about you? I think you're great, or you're beautiful, or one day, that popular person, you're going to find out when you're so much more successful. But in their world, they're living in the here and now. And what they're wondering and where they're trying to figure out is, how do I make it here with these people? And you can take that same child who is at the top of the social order, move them to a different community, put them in a new school, and they're going to go through the same process all over again. And what becomes, it's almost comical in a way, is that I'll get inquiries from parents and they'll be talking about, their grades and their homework and why are they not taking, better care of themselves. And, and I'm thinking, that's what matters to the parent right now. To the kid, they're going, how do I get seated at that table at lunch so I can be with the popular crowd? That's what I want to know, right? So what is it that they need at this age? Is they need lots and lots and lots of skill development, lots of understanding about how social dynamics work, lots of relationship skills, communication skills. So very frequently, a 13 or 14-year-old will come home and tell a story about something that went on at school that day. Maybe a friend who used to be a friend who's now stopped being friends with them because that friend wants to be with the more popular kind of, cooler crowd of people. And parents will say something like, well, why don't you just go talk to him? Or why don't you go talk to her? What the child is thinking, what this young teenager is thinking is, talk and say what? What are the exact words I'm supposed to say? And then they're going to wonder, and if I say those words, how do I respond if they say this? How do I respond if they say that? And that's a lot of the space that I work in when I'm working with kids at this age. So this 13-year-old who I met with today, the parents called me up a couple of days ago, and what was going on with him was there was a couple of boys at his school who were constantly teasing him, making fun of him, telling stories that were embarrassing about him in front of other people. And the mother is calling me up and she's saying he needs to get tougher. He needs to learn how to stand up to these boys. He needs to learn how to, give it right back to them. And I'm saying to the mom, it is true that he needs to learn how to be in the world with people who are not kind, people who are more aggressive, people who are more competitive like that. And he's got to learn how to not take it personally. He's got to learn what to say, what not to say. He's got to become a person who will actually say those things. But to me, it's also true, and even to me more important, that he needs to start surrounding himself with the people who are the right people for him. He's got to learn how to identify the right friends. He's got to learn how to make himself identifiable to the right friends. He's got to learn how to build those friendships, because when you start to build your world and you have great friends around you, when those boys come and do the stuff they've been doing, it doesn't hit you nearly as much. It doesn't matter nearly as much. So this is just absolute classic first stage of adolescent stuff. My conversation with a 13-year-old today was exactly the stuff that's going on in the lives of most boys this age, most girls this age. We were not talking about the state of the world. We were not talking about his future career path. We're not talking about, a breakup of a major relationship. We're just talking about trying to get along and get through 8th grade, get through middle school. Okay. So, and I know as we work together and he starts to learn skills and starts to understand things, his confidence level is going to rise dramatically. So he'll start to feel so much better equipped to be able to stand in the world. Unfortunately, while this is the highest priority for most youth at this age, it's not really in our school curriculum. So they have to learn this stuff either the hard way, or if they're lucky, they have advisors or people who say things in a way that they can really understand. Okay. So that's the first stage of adolescence. And if they resolve that, if they get to a point where they say, I'm sure of myself, I know I'm cool enough, I know how to make friends, I've got my people around me, like I know I can hold my own in the world, then the next stage that begins to merge, which begins somewhere around 15 and a half to about 17 years old. And this is, in my practice, the single most common stage that I hear from parents. And I even have thought about writing a book and just calling it 16, because it's so common that this question, the inquiries I get from parents is, if before they're just worried about where do I fit in the social world, now what they begin to think about as their brains are developing and they're starting to have a much larger scope of understanding of the world, is they're asking this question of, who am I? Where do I fit in the world? Where am I going with my life? What's the right path for me to go down? What's the right path in terms of career? What are the values that I want to subscribe to, independent of the religion I was raised in or the political affiliation of my parents or many of my friends? Who do I want to vote for? What do I actually believe is true? What do I believe is the right thing? Where do I want to be living my life? How do I want to be approaching, the world as I'm now coming of age and stepping into the world? And this is an enormous period of growth and can be terrifying for many teenagers, because their brains are now perceiving the world differently. They're thinking much greater in scope and distance from themselves. They're asking questions that have real, legitimate, lasting implications on their life. Where they choose to go to university, what they choose to study, if they choose to go to university, all these kinds of things begin to have serious implications in their life. Who they get closely associated with, what kinds of risks that they take in their life, all these things can have lifelong implications to them. So again, it's a period of profound realization and also a period of profound awakening. Now, there are always exceptions, and I was hearing some of this in some of the panel discussion. There are always exceptions where there are certain youth who, just because of life circumstances, have had to come face to face with growing up challenges, things that are really hard to deal with, losing a parent at a young age, for example. But for most teenagers, this is the age where they begin to wake up and really begin to see the world as it really is. So they go through this period of awakenings, and here's some of the most common ones that start to happen during this age. This is the age where they begin to realize that their parents don't have all the answers. Their parents are not all knowing. Their parents are not going to be able to save them from all the different challenges and things that are going to come up along the way in their life. And that can be a very scary thing, because up until then, they always thought, well, my home will be safe or my parents will be able to be there. But when they begin to see, like, my parents don't always know, and my parents are human, and my parents have problems, and my parents have stress in their life, whatever, it can be a real period of disruption inside them. It's when they begin for the first time, oftentimes, to realize that life is impermanent. It's where people they know will die. Well, they'll lose grandparents, or most of the kids I've worked know somebody that they grew up with at this point who has died of a drug overdose or a disease or something like that, to occasionally a suicide. And it's very shocking to them to have somebody their own age all of a sudden, be there one day and not be there the next day, and it be permanent. It's the age where they begin to really see the system, the larger system that's out there, and see the flaws in it, and realize that there's a lot of corruption, and there really is true that there is unfairness in the world, that there is sexism and racism and all sorts of biases and all sorts of advantages certain people have simply because their family has money or a certain reputation or a certain name. And as much as we want to try to hide them from that when they're younger, this is the age where they go, this really is how it is. And it's also the age where they really start to experience that bad things happen, and bad things happen to good people, or somebody gets in an accident, or somebody, loses some kind of opportunity because of some random glitch in some technology or whatever. And there's no way they're going to get that back. And so for a lot of teens at this age, they're going, not only do I have to figure out who am I and what do I want and where am I going with my life, but I'm also doing that when I realize the world around me is actually much more chaotic than anybody ever told me that it was. A lot of times I'll speak at schools, and if I'm speaking at a school where parents have very high expectations for their kids, you see the Chinese translation on here. When I was doing speaking tours in China right before the last one was right before the pandemic, but and I go to these schools and I hear, the parents just get the grades, get the grades, get the grades, and the kids are looking at it and they're saying, but there's all these other ways that I could go with my life. I have a lot of teens I work with here in the United States who are looking at this and saying, but what if I want to pursue some other kind of thing that doesn't require a university education? Or what if the school that's really the best one for me isn't the one that you went to that everybody recognizes the name of, but is a school that is in a different location, but feels right to me. And there's also a thing that I find a lot of them really struggling with right now. And this is multiple times a week, I'm having conversations with 16 to about 23-year-olds about this topic, which is, how do I stay positive when I don't really trust what the future is going to be like? Every single day, I'm getting this inundation of news about the environment and about the economy. And I mean, my gosh, if you follow the politics here in the United States, the contempt and the hatred and the name calling and, the inflation, and today the gasoline prices here are the highest they've been in 7 years, and kids are looking at this and they're saying, is there going to be water? Will there be food? Is there, any of this stuff? And so a lot of them are really struggling with, is there going to be a future? How do I stay positive in the midst of all this stuff? And if the world is changing so rapidly, how do I know that the direction I'm going right now isn't going to suddenly not work and I'm going to have to go a totally different way? So this is a really, really complicated time to be coming of age at this particular time in a human history. So the first stage is, am I cool enough to fit in with my peers? The second stage is, who am I and where am I going with my life? And I'll do questions at the end. I want to sort of get through this. Okay. So the third stage happens typically somewhere around 18 to about 24, 25 years old. Is typically where I see this. And it kind of depends on the individual and their individual journey that they're going on. So the third stage that I see is this stage, which I refer to as the stage of commitment. It's like, up until now, it's either just been do my schoolwork and hang out with my buddies and, try to have a girlfriend or try to, have plans with friends. Then it becomes do my schoolwork, figure out what I want to do with my life, invest in my training, my certification that it's going to take to get me there. The third stage is, it's now really time to get serious. Now I'm committing to a career path, which could mean the first of 12 different jobs. It could mean committing to like a young woman that I met with today who wants to go to medical school, and the decision that, that's probably 10 years of her life that she has to commit to before she's actually going to be licensed and doing the medicine that she wants to do. It's a stage where relationships are not just dating and having fun. It's a point where you start thinking about marriage. And if you're talking marriage, are you talking children and ready to make a commitment to something bigger than yourself? It's a stage where you're committing, getting hired for your first jobs, and you're really committed, and it's what you do matters to these other people who are paying you in this system that's much bigger than you. And in this particular stage, it's a responsibility to not just for themselves to be able to take care of themselves, but also to others. And the question that's underlying all this during this time is, am I ready for this? Am I good enough for this? So the other day I got a call, kind of a desperate need to talk immediately text message from a client as a 23-year-old. A really, really interesting guy, goes to school down in Los Angeles, started his own business a couple of years ago, took it very seriously, him and two of his best friends, raised venture capital and really built a really unique product that's for the outdoor activity world. And they've got the whole thing all the way through the prototype, got the funding, ready to launch. And all of a sudden, one of the three guys is saying, well, I'm not really sure I want to do this. And he's their marketing guy. And so my client calls me up and he says, I can't believe this. We're literally, 8 weeks away from him coming on full time and doing this stuff. And now he's saying, I don't really want to do this. And I was explaining to my client, I go, look, you have to understand, it may be that he's not ready for commitment. It may be this literally isn't the path he wants to go in life, but it also very likely could be it is what he wants to do. He's just not secure in himself and sure enough in himself that he's really ready for this. And I cannot tell you how many young people get their university degrees, go out, get their first jobs, get out there in the world, and they're panicked. They have imposter syndrome. I presented like I know what I'm doing, but do I really know what I'm doing? You have like people getting in serious relationships, and then all of a sudden the expression getting cold feet, getting nervous, am I really going to do this? And I think this is the last big question of adolescence. The first one, am I cool enough, attractive enough? Will I ever fit in the social world? The second one, who am I? Where am I going with my life? The third one is, I'm all in. Can I really seriously do this? Can I handle the stress, the pressure that's going to come at me? And when they get to the point where they answer yes to all three of these, then they're really ready to stand on their own and be an adult in the world. And what will oftentimes happen is somebody will never fully resolve the first one, but they'll figure out the second and the third one, which is a really interesting phenomenon. I see this a lot with parents where they figured out their career. They're really successful at their career. They've married somebody and, they've raised a family for themselves, but socially they're endlessly insecure. And they're always looking over the shoulder, and they're, living vicariously through their kids, trying to help their kids present in a way that makes them look good because they still depend so much on that. You can have people who socially get it all together. They know how to hold their own in the world, but they drift endlessly through their life, never having figured out who they are well enough to make good decisions and commit to a path in life and grow up and be 40, 50, 60 years old to be like that. So I think it's so critical that we recognize that part of our role, not just in raising our own children, but in contributing to the community around us, is helping these young people learn social skills, become more sophisticated, figure out things about themselves so they make high quality decisions for themselves, develop the confidence and the faith in themselves so that they can make and keep the commitment, so that they can come together completely with their complete integrity intact and then step fully into the world to become their own adult and really launch into their life. So this is my three phases, the three questions that are going on under the surface. And Teresa, do you want me at this point to sort of open it up and take some questions?
Jeff, you can do that. Perfect. Yeah, Jeff, you can do. Actually, we already have a question in the with the audience there. Let's see. I'm just going to come on camera. Christine is saying, everything you're saying is so valuable, but and all schools have their own curriculum. So then, how can kids have access to the sort of knowledge that you're sharing?
Well, okay. Look,
it's a tough question. I know.
No, it's okay. Like I heard one of the panel members earlier saying, "Send them to me." It's. I look at this as that sort of old African proverb, "It takes a village."
Yeah,
right?
We've been saying
It's just one of my great frustrations is that so many relationships that we have are transactional. It's just, I pay you to be my accountant. I you're going to tutor them in math or whatever. But these types of things are not just transactional related things. These are things that oftentimes are learned by somebody who's willing to sit down with your son or daughter, take a walk with them, share some stories with them. One of my favorite examples of this was a dad calls me up. He lives in the East Coast of the United States, and his son is 16, 17 years old. And he says, I just feel like my son is lost. And he just needs so much more worldliness about him. I'm scared about him going off to university at this point. And the dad and I started talking a little bit, and I came up with a suggestion, and I would offer this to anybody listening to this today. I said to the dad, I want you to pick 5 of the most interesting people in your life, adults who are in your life. And I want you to ask all 5 of them if they'd be willing to take your son out to lunch at some point over the next year. And I want you to pick somebody who did everything the conventional way, went to university, went to law school, got their degree, all that, the stuff that exactly everything he's been taught. I want you to pick somebody who maybe did that, but then started 3 businesses and went bankrupt 3 times before he finally figured out his way. I want you to, pick somebody who, she's an artist and she did it this way and she went this whole other way. And that's how she got into making films and being a writer and stuff. So pick people who you have all these sort of different pathways that they went down, and tell your son you're taking them out to lunch, each one. And the only question that you're going to feed him is, at the end of the lunch, he's supposed to ask them, what books do you recommend I read that you think would be helpful for me? Okay. So the dad, of course, is very excited about this, right? You can imagine when he goes to his 16-year-old son and says, Dan, guess what? You're going to be taking these people out to lunch. Dan's like, no, I'm not, Dad. It's not happening, right? But he gets his son to do it. And the son comes home at the end of the first lunch. It was supposed to be an hour. It was turned into 2.5 hours. The dad walks in the door and he says, Dad, Mr. whatever, he's the most interesting person. He told me this story about this. And the son to this day will say that those 5 lunches, he felt like he learned more in those 5 lunches than he learned, in all his years in high school, about what really happens in life and how to really be successful. And he references these conversations these people had with him. And I thought one of the most interesting things the son came to was not one of the books that these people recommended was ever a book that was in their school curriculum. It was all stuff from the outside. So what I say to this is, wherever you live, how do you build a tribe? How do you build a village? How do you build a team around you so that your son or your daughter has a lot of different really interesting people who will make themselves available, who will give advice and give guidance. So it's not just coming from you. And ideally having at least one person who will be available, all the time for them to send a message to if they're in an urgent situation or something that they really want some advice or something. But I think about this, like as a parent myself, I have two daughters myself. I began really before they were born. When I identify and I find people who I want in my children's life, how do I make that happen? How do I make those introductions happen? Right. And then I trust that those people will take it from there. And so far, we've been pretty successful with it. But you really have to ask others to do that in the same way that you have to be willing to do it for them.
Sounds good, Jeff. Any other questions from our audience there? Someone, actually, I saw Dr. KP from India has a question. Go for it.
Yeah.
Dr.
You're
K?
muted. Yeah.
Yeah, you could unmute yourself. Yeah, you raised your hand there, right? Dr. K? All right.
Okay.
It's
Maybe he
okay.
doesn't have a question, but he had a question earlier when I was talking about the second stage of
Yeah,
who am I?
probably.
So,
Yeah. Well, Christine has
Okay.
a question there too. Is she was saying, yeah. So how do people learn this holistically and this whole awareness thing, and maybe perhaps without such a curriculum in schools or schools playing part in grooming adolescents, then they leads to failed marriages or a bad business relationship. So how can we go forward with this, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, one other thing that I would add in, sort of links back to the first question, is also what are the conversations, that the sort of thing we talk about, the conversation around the dinner table, at what age do you change the conversation and start actually sharing things that are more personal and human to you? Because I think by the time they're teenagers, you want to be sharing things that are more personal. I don't mean necessarily intimate details of your life, but if you were at work that day and there was a particularly difficult meeting or difficult conversation you had to have with somebody, to talk that out at a meal, just sit down and say, I had one of my employees, I found out this was happening and we really love this employee, but people don't like what she's doing and I want to keep her, but how do I have this really uncomfortable conversation? And while in a 16-year-old's mind, they're not thinking about the workplace, the idea of how do you have difficult conversations with people, and when somebody's upset you, or somebody that you care deeply about is doing something you're concerned about, that's a real common universal thing. So I think part of this is the curriculum is your real life experiences and successes, and talking them through your own thinking process, telling them the details about what worked and what didn't work, who you went to for advice when you decided I needed some advice about this, and who you went to, and the questions that you asked to make sure that you got the kind of advice that you need. So again, I wish I could say, here's the curriculum for this. I look at this as, here's the larger concepts. There's 50,000 different opportunities to be teaching it to them. But when we're caught up in worrying about homework or brushing teeth or getting off of video games, and that becomes the most, important thing that we're talking about, or being on time to school, while those things are, relevant, we also have to recognize that you only get one chance to raise them. And it's these kinds of things that they're not learning out there that is really what's deeply underneath the surface they need to learn. And every time you get a chance to teach it, explain it. I'll also watch some television shows. It's an easy way to engage teenagers, is watch the TV shows that they watch. And either after the show, or my older one will tell you it's annoying, but I'll do this where I'll pause the show and make a comment about what the character just did right there, positive or negative. And while she'll say it's annoying because she's trying to watch the show, I know she's taking it in that this isn't just, a TV show. This is actually the kind of thing that can happen in real life.
Thank you, Jeff. That's such an amazing sharing, as with all the talks we call, spend a day on this, but unfortunately we're running out of time, and we do want you to go back to your wife and celebrate, get ready for your anniversary. So thank you so much for your sharing. Great. And you have a wonderful night in San Francisco. And if I go back to LA, we need to catch up.
That would be great.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
I'll catch you later. Bye. Yeah, thank you for the audience for being so engaging. Again, I want to remind you guys, if you haven't downloaded the app, make sure you do so. You're part of the Health and Wellness Challenge. We do like to, have you engage us, as much as you can. And Veron is back with our next announcement. Yes.
Yes, I'm back.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This Jeffrey had such an insightful sharing presentation about adolescence.
Yes.
It's so much to learn. Life is a journey.
Yes.
So there's no right and wrong way. There's no, there's no perfect way. So just have to enjoy every moment, enjoy the journey.